You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hi everyone, this is your host, Daniel Lee here. And I wanted to give you some background on the actual podcast. So, I really like asking people what they do, and I've had jobs as a public accountant, a management consultant, and lately as a public equities investor. And in getting these roles, I had to speak to a lot of people who were already doing what I wanted to do. And it turned out that what the media and industry stereotypes say about the role is not at all accurate to what you actually do. And this was not to mention that most assumptions people said about a certain individual's journey into that career field was also wrong. This was because it's never as linear as people think it is. It's never as simple as you do A, then you go to B, and then you will get to do C. It's actually much more complicated than that, and that's what I realized after having spoken to over 80 different people to learn about what they did. And something I found out was that a lot of my friends had not learned this yet. Some eventually would because they have already started reaching out to people to actually learn about what they did. But I also knew that many wouldn't because cold calling people really frightened them, and that's completely understandable. It still scares me too. But I also am always extremely curious about what other people do, and I love hearing about their stories. So I figured maybe I can help them out with this podcast and just document what I would normally be talking about with other people. And so that's what this podcast is about. It's me finding people with career journeys that I find interesting, and or they have roles that I would like to learn more about. And so I really do hope that I can add value to you in that sense as I go about selfishly using this podcast to learn more about other people and fulfill my own curiosity. So yeah, there you have it. Today's interview is with William Hillock, and he is a product manager at WealthSimple. WealthSimple is the famed robo-advising technology company in Canada, and Will has a very similar background to me. He's a University of Waterloo accountant, and he went through the accounting path to become a product manager at a financial technology firm, which people tend to call fintech. And in this interview, we dive into actually the benefits of his beginnings of not starting out in a big four environment and actually being in a mid-sized accounting firm, what the contrast is there. And then we also talk about his move to Shopify, actually being part of the company in the pre-IPO stages, as well as leaving it when they are doing extremely well, and leaving at the peak and moving over to another startup, what that journey is like, and then the whole transformation from having been an accountant to being a product manager and how that is different. And so this was a very unique journey that I had a lot of fun learning about and talking to Will with. And so I do hope that you enjoyed this as well. All right. Thanks, Will, for joining me for the interview today. So to the audience members, we have Will Hillock. He is the product manager at WealthSimple. And for the audience members who might not be familiar with the product, Will, could you give us a quick overview of what you guys do and what kind of product it actually is.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So with WealthSimple, we are trying to basically provide simple financial services to the masses. So you've probably heard the term robo-advisor, which is what we are, but we have our own take on it where we consider ourselves to be a hybrid robo-advisor. So although you're dealing with an online software platform, there are humans behind the technology. So if you have questions, if you're looking for financial planning, or you're just getting into investing and you want to know more, you're able to call us up, you're able to email in, and you can speak to either our client support team or a registered portfolio manager who is on our staff. And it gives people a peace of mind that they can, still talk to somebody and they're not restricted by just an interface where, there's not that human interaction. Although the interface is very simple, it's sleek, and it's very easy to ultimately set up an account and start investing. Most of the time within less than 24 hours. People have really attached themselves to having that ability to reach out, to have that human conversation, and so bringing it back, simple financial services. Which we've now extended into a savings product as well. So although you can open up an investment account like an RRSP or a TFSA, we actually have a smart savings account. So it's a high interest savings account, and this is our first foray outside of the investment world. And so our ultimate goal is to become a full service provider of all financial type products. And so the smart savings account was our first experiment outside of our existing initial space.
Okay, yeah, no, that's news to me as well. I didn't know you guys had that.
It's been around for only a month.
Okay.
But it offers an interest rate that is higher than any of the big six savings accounts, although it is not as high as some of the other banks like EQ Bank or B2B. But that being said, when you look at those rates that they post, a lot of the times they're just promotional type offers, and so you may get it for 3, 6, 12 months, but beyond that you tend to drop back down to a regular rate, whereas ours is consistently 1.7%, which is fairly competitive.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I've found that for many of my friends, like given my background, like being in the buy side and stuff, it was very weird that not a lot of our friends would be investing their savings away to grow it, but I think I found that this high interest savings have been good alternatives for them to, put their money, park it somewhere to at least gain something, to at least match inflation or slightly beat it.
Yeah, and that's it. And part of our mandate is wanting to ensure that we do cater to millennials and the younger generation, but you'd be surprised at the number of clients we have that are 40 and above. So different age groups see different value drivers from our product, but ultimately what we want to provide is a full picture in terms of your investment and savings profile. And so we are really reinforcing the need for an emergency savings fund, in case something does happen. You always want to have 3-6 months of savings set aside, the rainy day fund, as people commonly call it. And so we've really been driving that home as of late. And we think as part of any financial plan, this is a key component that you want to have.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we'll touch more upon WealthSimple, I think, as the interview goes on. But I think I want to first hit upon, you're not actually from Toronto, are you? Like, you worked in Ottawa for a bit. I know you went to the University of Waterloo, but so where did you grow up? Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood?
Yeah, born and raised in Ottawa,
okay,
just outside of Ottawa. But yeah, all of my family is based in Ottawa. So up until university, I was there, lived a very normal life, I think, by anyone's standards. I'm an only child, So no siblings, but grew up playing sports. Golf and hockey were my two big ones. So I had a winter sport and a summer sport. And yeah, so just, lived a very normal life. Went away for university, which was my first time being away from home. So that was a good experience in terms of allowing me to grow and figuring out, who I was and what my likes and dislikes were. And Waterloo having a niche accounting program was ultimately my first pick, when trying to figure out what schools I wanted to go to. Having, I guess, figured out that very early on in high school that accounting was something that I was, very interested in and wanted to pursue. I think that I was a little different from most of my peers who were, it was up in the air as to what they wanted to do. They weren't really sure.
Yeah.
But I knew from, grade 11 that, accounting, and I attribute this to my teacher at the time that I had, who was a fantastic business teacher and accounting teacher, made it interesting, made it enjoyable, and I excelled at it. And so, it was something that when it came time to choosing what to, go into, I had thought about law, but realized that I wasn't, a very aggressive person. I wouldn't have made a very good lawyer. Maybe a doctor. Again, I didn't really want to do 7 years of school. But accounting, was something that I enjoyed. I took a sense of pride in the exercises and the work. It was very detail oriented. And it's just logically it made sense. So that kind of put me down that path. And although I was originally looking at staying in Ottawa for school, my parents ultimately put it in my ear that why don't you consider maybe looking outside of Ottawa?
Really?
I don't know whether they were sick of me and wanted me out of the house, or they just wanted me to experience life on my own. I'm forever grateful for them kind of giving me that push out of my comfort zone, applying to Waterloo, getting accepted to Waterloo, accepting accepting and attending, living in residence, first year university, and ultimately just growing as a person. So that's kind of early life, I would say, up until university.
Yeah. What about before grade 11? Like, how when you're younger, between you're in elementary school, ages 7 to 13, you start. I think that's when for me at least, you start kind of having dreams of what you might want to be growing up. I can't imagine that you said accountant at a young age.
No, actually, it was, and this was probably very typical for the time, but a crime scene investigator.
Really?
So CSI was on TV, and it was the hot TV show at the time, and it was captivating. I was like, this is the coolest job ever. You get to solve murders and piece it all together with science. And once you actually did some research into what it took to become a crime scene investigator and their life cycle, basically, like a crime scene investigator lasts only about 6 to 7 years.
Oh, really?
Just because of what they end up seeing, day to day in their job. It's just, it has such a traumatizing effect that they eventually just cut loose eventually, and they're like, you know what, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, maybe that's not for me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's probably not the best career decision. And so, although that's what I had initially, was interested in, it didn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
Like I said before, lawyer, was always of interest. But, I wasn't an aggressive person. I didn't really think that I could stand up in court and hold my own. And so, even though I took a couple of law classes and got to participate in mock trials, which were very, very interesting in getting to play a role, it was ultimately not meant to be.
No, I think it's pretty cool that you still at least tested the assumption that you at least looked into what are the realities like as a crime scene investigator, so you at least tested it out instead of kind of jumping blindly into it.
Yeah, I like to think that I tend to overthink things before making a firm decision as to whether to go forward with it or not. So even with looking into being a lawyer, it's not all being in the courtroom. There's a lot of paperwork and research. And so, you get these images of what Hollywood puts into your head. And you're just like, it looks amazing, but it's nowhere near reality. And so, like I said, I'm a very cautious person, and it can take me time. And I think that's why accounting fits so well, is just, especially with money. It's like, before spending on something, I do my due diligence in terms of, does this make sense? Okay, should I spend the money? Delay. And then eventually, I just get to a point where it's like, okay, let's do it. I'm all in, jump in, buy it, go forward, don't look back. I made the decision, this is it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think even when you talked about thinking about being a crime scene investigator, you were initially, thinking about the research, the kind of investigativeness, and I think that there is some aspect of that, I think, into what you've ended up doing. And I think last time we spoke, I reached out to you by cold message on LinkedIn. You've been kind enough to sit down and have a coffee with me, but you told me about how you found yourself getting more attracted to tax instead of just regular audit and financial accounting. I'm wondering, was there a specific factor that made a big difference in terms of why you gravitated towards that area? And was that during your initial earlier days in Collins Barrow where you started? Yeah,
so I during university, being at Waterloo, the co-op program, I ended up getting a job at Collins Barrow in Ottawa, so I was able to go back home while I was on my co-op terms. And for my co-op terms, I was working in the audit assurance group, which most public accountants, or most accountants who go the public accounting route, kind of start out in. And then once I graduated from university and wrote my UFE, the final exam at the time, which is now the CFE, I continued in the audit and assurance group, but ultimately, after becoming a senior and working on many different files, realized that the type of work was fairly repetitive. Once you saw one type of scenario, you'd almost see it identical. Whether it was the same industry or not, you're applying the same procedures, you're applying the same logic. And so I realized that I was becoming bored. I wasn't learning anything new, and I was stagnating. So what drew me to tax was the kind of never-ending list of situations that a taxpayer could, fall into. And so that is what ultimately, drew me there. In terms of being a part of working at Collins Barrow, we would get experience in both the audit side and the tax side during tax season. And taking part in those tax seasons is what really kind of drew me into the tax space. And, I was good at it, I excelled at it, and one of the partners reached out to me and said, you know what, why don't you give it a shot, come over to the tax group, I think you'd be a great fit. And so I thought things over, and ultimately I liked the fact that I would be waking up to learn something new every day. There'd be a new situation that would present itself, and there's a lot less what I found to be like gray area. It was more black and white, based on precedent, and you would look at the tax law and ultimately interpret it, based on past decisions, but also just based on like the set of facts and the set of rules listed out, and so that's that is me, I find, where it's just like black or white. I don't like gray, I don't like subjectivity. And so it was kind of just a perfect fit, and so ended up joining the tax group and working in the tax group for a few years, learning a lot. Especially at a mid-sized firm, you get the opportunity to work on many different clients and many different files. You're not just stuck on one client for months on end. And so that, I felt, really gave me a well-rounded breadth of knowledge, and especially when it came to tax and the Income Tax Act. You look at the 1,000 pages plus of very thin, Bible paper, I call it. The opportunity to learn something is right there. It's at your fingertips, and it's interesting, it's tedious, it's detailed, but all of those things were kind of just reasons why I enjoyed and fell in love with the tax space.
Yeah, no, and I have a friend who did personal tax in the Big Four and moved over to a mid-sized firm as well. And the individual told me about how much the learning curve was actually steeper at the mid-sized firm, because you have so many different scenarios that you're not really exposed to in the Big Four environment. And so, yeah, definitely like the learning, you'll get much more learning out of that. And I definitely saw that side as well. And so when I look at your career, you look at your LinkedIn page, it's Colin Sparrow, Shopify, now WealthSimple. Given your personality of making sure that everything is aligned or doing the full kind of analysis before you make a decision, in making the decision to jump from each one of your career spaces, was there any kind of fear associated with it at all? Or do you get to a point in your analysis where it's just black and white and then it's just easy?
Oh no, it was total fear, 100% fear. I remember when I first was looking into the Shopify opportunity, one of their recruiters, in-house recruiters, had reached out to me about this role, and it was me. It was what I was doing at Colin Sparrow, but it would be just for the one company and the group of companies. And I'd heard about the company. There were rumblings, of the potential success that they were having, and so I thought to myself, if this is my opportunity to look outside of public accounting, this is the type of opportunity that I would want. I was very much focused on the partner track, right from, first year university. I always saw myself staying, the traditional route, public accounting, partner, kick back, golf, enjoy life. But, this opportunity kind of put the thought into my head. And I had a colleague who had left the firm about 6 months prior. And so that was kind of the first, thought that, okay, maybe there is life outside of public accounting. Maybe I should open my eyes and look for those opportunities out there, just to make sure that the route that I'm going is the route that I want to go down. And so I ended up going through the process at Shopify. 5 or 6 interviews later, they offered me the position, and that's where the fear really kicked in.
Yeah.
It was just like, whew, this is life-changing. This is flipping everything upside down, going from a stable public accounting firm to a tech startup that is here today, but where could they be in 3 years, 5 years? And that was always my biggest fear was, having seen the 30-year path that I kind of had laid out for me at the public accounting firm.
Right.
That I had no idea what Shopify would look like in 5 years, let alone 3 years. And so that was probably the most the most scary piece of the decision was, where will I be, in the future? And so there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion with my parents. They, being very traditional, very stable boomers, were skeptical of the move. My mother works for Canada Post in the finance department. She's worked with them for 30 years. Stable, just the stereotypical stable boomer. My dad is an owner of a home hardware store in Ottawa. Again, entrepreneur, but a very traditional entrepreneur in that, my grandparents started the store. He ultimately took it over, and made it his own. And he, second generation, that was always him. And so for me, to start out in the traditional path and then ultimately turn upside down to go into this tech world, they were very skeptical of the decision. But given I'm an only child, they have to be supportive. But I know that they were supportive regardless. And so, they supported my decision regardless of which way I went, and ultimately having their backing is what pushed me over, the edge in terms of taking the position with Shopify and starting a new chapter.
And was this, for timeline's perspective, was this before Shopify had done the IPO?
It was. So they first reached out December 2014.
Yeah.
I got the job in early 2015.
Yeah.
And I started with them in February 2015. And the first day of work, I go to meet the finance team, and my boss and our general counsel pull me aside and basically tell me, look, you need to sign an NDA because we're currently in the process of going public.
Wow.
So, welcome to the team.
Yeah.
And so it was a super exciting time to be a part of the company. Kind of just showed up at the right time, right place, right time.
Right before all the parties started.
Right before things really took off.
Yeah.
And so getting to see the going public process, the IPO process, I'm always going to hold that close to my heart, because I don't really expect to see that ever again in my career, and if I do, that's just bonus. So although I wasn't necessarily active in the IPO process, given when I joined, I got to see things happen around me and kind of take it all in. And so that was exciting. That was unique. And, I will always, like I said, I will always hold that experience close. So starting with them in February, Shopify went public in May 2015. And, it was just enjoying the roller coaster ride from there. It was up and to the right, for the 2.5 years that I was there. And then, started, and then, things change, life changes, and different, new decisions had to be made.
And then in the light of those new decisions, so you were still in Ottawa with Shopify, and that's where their headquarters is, so that makes sense. And after that, you've made the transition to come to WealthSimple, which also made you move to Toronto. So before we dive into that specifically, just on the transition from Ottawa to Toronto, I've never really worked in Ottawa before, but I've lived in Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto, and from my experience, each city is still extremely different in how the people interact and the culture of the city. Even though we're just one country, it's still as if we're I've been in 3 separate countries at one point. So what would you say are kind of the 3 distinct factors you noticed as a difference between working in Ottawa and Toronto?
That's a good question. I would say Ottawa is far more stable. I guess I say, it's a government town, right? So the federal government has over 300,000 employees in the city. Yeah. So it's a government town. It's stable. It's family oriented, and it gets a bad rap for being dull. But I will defend Ottawa till the end of days. That it's a great city to grow up in. I'm glad I left when I did to go to university, because I had grown tired of it. As an 18-year-old, it wasn't that exciting of a city to be living in. Whereas Waterloo, being a university town, caters to the students, and there's a little more enjoyment to be had. That being said, coming back to Ottawa after university, I really saw the city in a new light and appreciated it for what it was. And so, and even, when I left, we, much like a lot of cities, Ottawa did have its own food scene up and coming. It had its activities, it had its, things to do. And so, I love Ottawa. My family's there. I will always, it'll always be my hometown. But Toronto's very different. Obviously much bigger. Yeah. Although living downtown, you create your own bubble, and you kind of stay within that bubble, because everything you need, grocery, drugstore, shopping, work, it's within that bubble. And
right.
You have no need to really go outside that.
Give you a little 5-minute radius.
Exactly. And so, for me, I've got my car here. I only use it when I need to go to hockey, once a week. But outside of that, Vaughan, Markham, all of the suburbs, it would be like a whole other country as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But Toronto's exciting. It's big city. It's loud. There's always something going on. Unlike Ottawa, all the concerts, all the artists come through the city.
Yeah.
They tend to skip Ottawa. So, one of the unfortunate things. So it's great to be here. But yeah, it's very different. But I'm coming to appreciate it. The longer I'm here. I've been here for 8-9 months now.
Yeah.
It's been good. I've tried to replicate life as much as possible here in Toronto as I had in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And so that made the transition easier, a lot smoother for sure. And having friends from university who came here after university and were pushing me to move here for years and years and years, and I always told them, I'm comfortable in Ottawa, guys. I'm sorry. They're excited that I finally made the jump, and so no, things are good. I don't regret my decision to move. It's been an exciting time, and looking forward to what life holds, going forward.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I guess moving to a different city, that's obviously a big consideration for your career switch. But you were at Shopify. You guys now went through public. You've seen what it could potentially do. You're in a huge party. You see the huge upside, and then you leave that to come to WealthSimple, another startup. Now it's your second time going to a startup, so maybe you're a little more conditioned and you're not as fearful. But yeah, I would still think, like, if I was in your shoes, that there would still be this huge fear of missing out in terms of all the potential growth that you could still be part of. What was the thought process like that?
Yeah, no, again, it was fear. Like the fear was very much still there, especially moving cities. And I think this time it was more so the moving cities factor, moving away from family. So it was more of a personal factor as opposed to a career factor. I felt confident in the company. Again, WealthSimple, you hear rumblings, you hear good things, up and coming. So really for me it was, do I want to move away from Ottawa? My hometown, my family's all there. Is this something that I can process and rationalize and come to terms with? And ultimately the outcome was yes. But again, it was not difficult. When I started going through the interview process with WealthSimple and they offered me the job, there was a lot of back and forth. I was a yes, I was a no, and this was all in my head. Mm-hmm. And I remember one night telling my wife, I was like, you know what, I'm not going to take the job, and I'm just stick it out. And then I was at a baseball game with my dad, and we were talking about the Shopify, being at Shopify and the opportunities still available, and moving to Toronto. And I should caveat that I always saw myself potentially moving to Toronto if I wanted to stay in the tech space, because the tech space in Toronto is growing exponentially, and the opportunities are far more plentiful than in Ottawa, where it's really Shopify and then a lot of what I call old tech, like hardware tech. So, yes. Building, microsystems and whatnot. Yeah. And that takes place in one of the suburbs of Ottawa, Canada North it's called, and I had no interest in ever working for, one of the companies out there. Yeah. So I said to myself, oh shoot, sorry. No worries. I said to myself, moving to Toronto would be the right decision if I wanted to move, stay in tech. Mm-hmm. And tech was exciting. There's always something new. There's always another company on the cutting edge. And so, my dad said to me, he's like, nobody will ever understand why you made the decision except for yourself. Mm-hmm. And hold on to that. You're making the decision. You're making the decision for you, and don't let anybody else influence that. And so I took that to heart, and that was really what pushed me over the edge in terms of deciding, you know what, I'm going to take the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what did it, and it kind of put my mind at ease, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Does it actually feel like rest is history though when you're in it? Do you ever have moments of doubt where you ask yourself, was this the right decision to make? And if you do, how do you get over that? What kind of self-talk do you do?
Yeah, I guess it sounds kind of cheesy to say like the rest is history because it's still ongoing. But no, I have zero doubt. Yeah. I don't look back on it at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look back on my time at Shopify as being, you know, a fantastic experience. I learned a ton in a very fast-paced environment, but the point at which I left was the right time for something different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the company was growing to a point where, you know, the job was moving even further outside my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had started, I would say the job was already outside my comfort zone to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that made me work twice as hard to keep up and really, you know, push myself to learn more, you know, take on, you know, different, you know, variety of different roles, own the autonomy that I had. But, you know, after 2.5 years, I was ready for something a little different. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity would not have been there to have worked remote in Toronto for Shopify because the finance team is predominantly based in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. And so that wasn't the type of working arrangement that I wanted. Mm-hmm. So that is why I ended up started looking around for different opportunities. And I'd come across the WealthSimple role. But there was one key requirement of it that made it sound like I needed to have an engineering background in addition to an accounting background. Uh-huh. And I was just like, well, no, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being another recruiter, an outside recruiter who reached out to me and was able to clarify that one requirement. And it wasn't so much they needed an engineer, but they needed somebody with the technical expertise and ability to educate the engineering team that I'd be working with to basically take my technical knowledge and code it into the platform. Mm-hmm. I was like, well, that I can do because I was doing that as part of my job at Shopify. So when I got that cleared up, I said to myself, okay, you know, I'm ready to throw my hat into the ring and let's see where this goes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess circling back, I don't regret the move. I have no doubts. You know, I'm fully confident in my decision, and you know, I'm happy with how things have worked out so far.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like when we first chatted, like I was extremely curious about the product management space, and we had a really good conversation about that. And I think the big question I had for you at that time too was on, I think, the industry stereotype or assumption that, yeah, to be a product manager, you have to be an engineer. I think that's what I read for one of the Google articles. And I think when I saw you having a product manager title without an engineering background, and hearing about your story about, yeah, like utilizing your tax technicals, it did kind of debunk that myth. But from what you've seen, would you say that predominantly they tend to be of more like engineering backgrounds, or do you see a kind of shift happening?
Yeah, I would say there's a shift. So if I look at our product management team, mm-hmm. our head of product is an engineer, by trade, mm-hmm. who transitioned into product over his career. But of the product managers who report into him, like one is a true product manager who, you know, basically came out of college, university into product management. One is a former consultant. Another is a designer turned product manager, and then there's me, who's an accountant turned product manager. And I'd say like my role as a product manager is slightly different from everybody else. Like I don't consider myself a traditional product manager. You know, I consider myself a niche product manager in my very specific, you know, tax accounting realm. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, I had the tax knowledge to basically build out the the tax compliance requirements for our platform so that our clients could get their tax slips in a presentable, clear manner, that simplified tax season as much as possible. And so, if that wasn't, if the job description was anything different besides what was on the job description, like that role, I would not be in that role today. And so, the reason why I ended up being interested in this role is because I could rely on my technical background. I had been in a technical role at Shopify in the public accounting firm for so long. I wanted to basically broaden my experience, and so I felt like being in this product role would allow me to like I say, kind of round that out for my career. And my goal was eventually, at some point in the future, is to get back into the finance side of things. So having, experience with the technical and having experience with the product and the business and the operations side, I foresee a natural transition back into finance at some point in the future. That is, that's kind of where I see myself, whether it's in 3 years, whether it's in 5 years, whether it's next year, remains to be seen. But I think having the technical and product, the combination of both, is a great, 1-2 subset of skills to have.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think fitting to what we are learning more about your personality, you were kind of matching all the puzzles and the missing pieces together to ultimately get to where you want to or where you envision. And so then if you were to kind of take me through kind of a sample day, so if we picked today, for example, can you walk me through what time you got into the office, the first thing you did, and by like 10 a.m. what were you doing?
Yeah, so today was actually unique because I spent the morning at one of our advisor offices. So WealthSimple has an advisor-specific business where we provide the software for financial advisors to basically bring their book of clients onto our platform. They maintain the relationships, but we do the portfolio management. And so once a month, we go out to one of our largest advisors' offices and basically have a monthly meeting, catch up with them, going through new product features, what we've launched, what we're working on, listen to their feedback, any issues or concerns they might have, and so that usually takes up the morning. And so that was this morning. Getting back to work in the afternoon. There's it's a little bit of everything. So whether it be meetings with various teams, or just kind of diving into the data and the metrics of our platform, it's a very different day-to-day from what I'm used to, because of how abstract I find the role to be. So every day ultimately looks different. But it's usually a case of meetings, analysis, data analysis, write-ups in terms of working with the engineering teams. We do 2-week sprints, and so writing up summaries for the various stakeholders in the company, keeping them up to date as to what we're working on, touching base with the engineers to making sure that what they're working on, if they have any blockers, does my technical knowledge get them past what's blocking them, working with the design team, to kind of take my ideas as to what we're thinking about a specific feature, and turning it into a mock-up that we then, give to the engineers, and basically the rest is history. They code it, they bring it to life. So it's a combination of all those. And so it's it's very different, but I've been in it for 9 months now, and I think I'm getting a hang of it.
Yeah, I think when we spoke last, when I asked you to categorize how you spent your time, you said it was 20% meetings, 40% requirements gathering, and then 40% just everything else.
Yeah.
Does that still hold true, or has it shifted?
I would say the 20% meetings holds, the information gathering. Yeah, I would say the 20-40-40 is pretty consistent.
Yeah.
That 40% other might actually be closer to 50 or 60. Like
Yeah.
it's, it's really just a hodgepodge of everything. Whether it's client bugs or client issues, if it's tax related, front end, back end, I could be running around touching base with many different teams. In one day. It's really, it definitely, especially during tax and RRSP season, it definitely took up a lot more time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say we're kind of coming back to the norm now, but, there's always something that comes up.
Mm-hmm. And for WealthSimple, how long is the kind of product lifecycle in terms of when you first decide to start a new idea or initiate on it, and then the amount of time you guys have to finally build it and launch it?
Good question. We like to ship often and ship quickly.
Yeah.
So we try and break things down into a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
What does a version 1.0 look like?
Yeah.
And so from, the brainstorming phase to the, design phase to the actual dev work to launch, I'd say on average maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the size, of the feature or product that's being built out. Now, obviously, you could ask, any one of my colleagues, and they would have a different answer, just based on the types of features that they're working on. Mm-hmm. We really try and scope projects out so that, within our 2-week sprint, we're able to, ship 90% of that, particular feature, so that, as we roll into the next sprint, there's very little cleanup, and then boom, we're off onto the next feature or onto the next issue.
Okay.
So, you're wanting to stay ahead of competitors, and you're always wanting to introduce, new features and new improvements to the platform. So the faster you can ship, the better, as long as you don't break something along the way.
Yeah. And when would you say your involvement begins, and where does it end?
So
in that life cycle?
I would say I'm actively involved throughout the whole life cycle. So
Okay.
from the brainstorming and the planning phase, we'll take the ideas. I'll usually run the idea by the designers. So in the design phase, I kind of pitch them as to, okay, here's what we're thinking about. This is what I kind of see as the end result, but I'm going to, give you basically creative rights to it. And if you think of something, better, by all means, let's run with it.
Right.
So I kind of step out at that point, let the designers do their work. They come back with the mock-ups, step back in, we take a look. We, make sure the stakeholders approve. Once approved, it goes into dev. The engineers kind of sink their teeth into it. We'll do some scoping around, okay, of these mock-ups, what do we have to build? What's already been built? How do we break this down into stories that we can address within a 2-week sprint? Do we have to break out a part of the project into a separate, into its own project, or can we do this all within 2 weeks? We agree to those timelines, and then the devs go off, do their thing. If they have any questions, they know where to find me. And then when we're good to ship, we play around with the feature, make sure nothing breaks, and then out it goes into the world. And we wait and see what feedback we get, and if we're able to measure any metrics in particular, we're actively keeping an eye on those to make sure that there's adoption, and what we're expecting to see, we end up seeing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And for you, in terms of this whole kind of process, and being a product manager, what specific activity would you say gives you the highest energy level in terms of excitement, highest state of total engagement and flow?
It's anything client facing. So any feature that's like client facing, that has a tangible, that changes the platform in one way or another. That's what excites me, because it's the most visible. And I consider myself like a humble, modest person, but I get satisfaction out of being able to say, oh yeah, you see that page, my team did that. You know,
Right,
we're
right.
responsible for that. We came up with that idea.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, that is what is the most satisfying. And so, you know, my big project over tax season was building out a specific page within the platform where clients could see all of their expected tax statements for the year, you know, with an expected date. And when, you know, the slips were ready, basically they fed right into the system and the link would come live. So seeing that, you know, taking it from concept to mock-up to reality was incredibly satisfying. And the fact that it was, you know, a part of my like technical crutch, as I call it, you know, being that it was tax related, you know, was even just made it that much more satisfying, you know, in ways, feeling like, you know, we're taking what can be a convoluted concept and making it, you know, simple, easy, and addressable for clients to use.
All right, so if that's the big pro, then what is the other side? What would you say is a con of the role that nags at you, or you find to be annoying or kind of hindersome?
I want to say like metric tracking, just because my team is very like in the background, you know, back end focused. It's very hard to create tangible metrics that we can monitor on a quarterly basis. And so I've tried to like move away from tracking metrics because I just don't feel like they're applicable to what we're doing. And so that, you know, that was definitely something that took me a while to get my head around, because when I first started out, you know, I was trying to create metrics almost for the sake of creating metrics. It was like, well, is this really, you know, achievable? Is this really valuable to, you know, any of the stakeholders? You know, does anybody really care? And the question, you know, the answer was no. And so it's like, well, why are we doing this then? And so making that tweak, you know, just kind of building our features and building out a roadmap, you know, knowing that these are things that we need, you know, it's definitely made life simpler and more enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess as we're kind of hitting up to the end of the interview, I'd like to ask 2 questions that I generally ask all the interviewers at the end. So if your 20-year-old self, I guess you in like 3rd year of Waterloo, were to see you now, given where you are at this moment, what do you think the emotional reaction would be? Would it be like surprise or excitement or disappointment?
I think it'd be like confusion more than anything. It'd just be like, wait, you're in tech now? Like, what do you mean you're in tech? Like I've got partner track lined up, like back home in Ottawa. Like, what you actually caved in and you moved to Toronto? Like, who are you? I don't even know you anymore. I think that would be the reaction. Honestly, you know, if I look back as to who I was, you know, 10 years ago almost, night and day different. So that would definitely be the expected reaction.
No, I think that's a very genuine reaction. And so if you could give advice to that 20-year-old self, or even the friend of that 20-year-old self, what kind of advice would you give?
Change is scary, but almost all the time it's for the best, and you know, things work out in the end the way that they're supposed to. So don't, you know, hesitate, and don't be concerned with, you know, the small details, like holistically and at a high level. You know, if you're thinking of making a change, you're likely doing it for the right reason. So do it, action it, don't hesitate, don't think twice, just go for it.
All right, great. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah.
And,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the interview.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you. So thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please check out other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date for the future episodes. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, whichever is applicable to you. To see past episodes, you can go to oldmandan.com/podcasts. Also, you can sign up to my weekly newsletter on my blog, oldmandan.com/newsletter. You can stay up to date with future podcast episodes that way, and included in the newsletter are my book reviews I write, my weekly article related to the domain of self-development systems, as well as 7 things I learned throughout the week on being healthy, wealthy, and wise. Finally, special thanks to icons8.com for allowing me to use their music Tiny People on the podcast. Great. I will see you all next time. Take care.